Most buyers never tell you where you lost them. They sit through your demo, read your proposal, take your follow-up call, and then they go quiet. And somewhere in your sales process, that deal gets marked as lost to a competitor or no decision. But the truth is usually simpler, and it's harder to hear. The process broke down somewhere, and nobody on your team saw it coming, because your buyers have a seat at every meeting you will never be invited to. The outside seat sits in that seat. I'm Mike Tumulty, founder of Inside Now, where we go through your commercial funnel as a real buyer and tell you exactly what we find. I'm also the host of the Outside Seat podcast, where I bring that conversation to the people who can actually do something about it. Every week, two strands. The GTM leaders talking strategy, and then the unsung heroes talking reality. Brought to you by Flourish, the GTM talent partner that connects hiring, development, and performance in sales, in life. Now to today's show. And welcome to this week's episode of The Outside Seat. I am thrilled to be joined today by Nicholas Gollop. Nicholas and I have worked together in a couple of companies, and I also invoked a little bit of the friendship when I was working in consulting to help me on a specific project. So I've got a lot of respect and admiration for the work that Nicholas has done. And he's also an author of a book, and we'll touch on that during this episode today. Nicholas works in revenue operations, and it's one of those functions that makes everything else work within the GTM. And you might say it's one of those unsung heroes. It's still one of the most important parts of a GTM organization, but invariably it's one of those organizations that's built last. It's staffed wrong, it's measured badly, and it's the perception sometimes of a revenue operations team is this is a reporting function, and it's so much more than that. So Nicholas, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Why don't you give a little bit of a sense of who you are and maybe a little bit of a sense of what you think revenue operations is within the GTM organization today?
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Mike. It's an honor to be here. It's really good to share a bit more about my background and experience, and I think also the direction of travel for revenue operations as a whole. But my take on RevOps is it's the backbone of the business. The goal is to achieve seamless and integrated operations. And it's also a bit sad because the idea is, in my opinion, that we're not supposed to be noticed, right? The goal is to not be noticed, is to design something that is as flawless as possible, where we remove the unnecessary lift from people and giving them time back to do their actual jobs. And this can be very broad. It can go from the actual execution, but the strategy, the design, and the architecture, which in my opinion is the most important one, which is designing things right once, rather than having to go back and re-engineer the whole thing, because once you're doing that in a moving car, it's a bit difficult.
It's a really interesting concept you said there around not to be noticed. And if I use a sports analogy, which I often do on these episodes, you think of it's an interesting time where you've got the World Cup just about to start over in the US, Canada, and Mexico, and you go back to the last World Cup, and arguably the greatest football match that was ever seen was Argentina versus France. But you could probably name all of the players on each side, but the one person that you can't name is the referee. And I'm not suggesting that RevOps is the referee of a GTM organization, far from it, but it's one of those unnoticed people within that of what excellent looks like. So it's interesting that you mentioned that as it's something that's not to be noticed, but you said before that it's a bit sad. Why is that a bit sad? Because I look at that as maybe a positive, if I'm using the sports analogy, that you don't want to notice the referee, but it makes everything else awesome. It's still a very respected role, but why do you term that as it's a bit sad?
I think it's a bit sad because it's the perception of it, right? People, you do a lot. You're always trying to make things kind of turn and get from one place to another, executing 500 different things at the same time with different stakeholders, with different priorities. And we are rarely ever credited to making things happen because at the end of the day, we take it and then people do something with whatever we do. And then they get quota, they get whatever happens from that, which is a bit more visible. And equally, we're there, right, in the back end. But the sadness about it is you want to, feel like you're doing things, even though we know it's always important to make sure that people understand. And that is the tricky piece, getting people to really understand that this wouldn't have happened without a proper design and architecture, to notice that and credit it as to um, who needs to be credited. But equally, it's not about the credit, right? To me, for example, it's important to see that things got solved. That's the credit. But it's
You know, it's,
usually an afterthought.
it's a really good, uh, s- um, it's a really good way of describing what I've been saying recently around that unsung hero. It's like those people within the organization that don't necessarily get the credit, but they are the people that make the moves happen within the organization. So whether that is RevOps, and we'll really focus in on that today, but there are other functions across GTM that don't get the glory, don't get invited to sales kickoffs, don't get the adulation on the stage, but are a fundamental part of what actually makes GTM operate and move and be successful. And it's not the misconception is it's a reporting line, and it's also a dumping ground for, well, what are we going to do with this? I know, well, let's give it to revenue operations. They can take care of it. And that's, you guys within that function, you take it and you make the best of it and you turn it around and help the business move forward. But in that sense, I would agree. Yes, it's a little bit sad that you don't get that recognition and that credit to the levels that maybe a VP of sales would get, even though you're a peer at that level, or account executive or account manager, or another unsung hero is the customer success person who manages a book of business of 5, 10, $20 million, but they're not getting the same credit as an AE who's generating 1.2 million in new business a year. There's a disparity between that recognition. So I understand it from that perspective. Do you feel like RevOps is a dumping ground? Am I putting words in your mouth there, or is that what generally happens?
I think RevOps can be a dumping ground in an organization that doesn't have structure or doesn't have the understanding of what it actually should be. That usually happens from inheriting a function or building that function in a way that it's treated as a system admin or like the kind of junior approach to it without proper guidance and vision and leadership to actually direct it forward. That usually becomes the case where people that don't really know how to steer executive stakeholders or, well, executives in general are just there to solve fires that they haven't created. Sometimes they have created the fires because, again, they're junior and they're not really, they don't have that direct sense of direction. And so it can become a dumping ground across the board. But that's also why it's so important at the right time to get leadership that really understands vision, design, architecture, and everything to learn, or sorry, to teach the people what it actually should be, give a direction and a sense of purpose, but also tell the team and instruct the team that saying no with another alternative is fine. We don't have to say yes all the time. It's the whole point is that we don't. Need to be focused. We need to be organized. We need to be ruthless in how we actually do things. Otherwise, You start 500 things at the same time. It feels like progress. It feels like you're doing something, but you're not actually doing anything. It's just noise and busy work. But I'm very much of the opinion, if you have to do 10 things, do 2 at 100% that are the most impactful ones. People are already going to notice. So you move on.
It's a really good look at that. If you look at the function, I think the other where I've seen it work poorly is when the function just becomes a firefighting function. It's always putting out fires, and sometimes fires need putting out. But when your whole operation is spending time putting those fires out and not looking at the strategic imperatives of what we're trying to do as a business, then that can be problematic. And that goes back to your point of having strategic leadership, looking at what this function can actually do for us going forward rather than fixing the issues that persist today. And you made the analogy there of if you've got 10 things to do, just do the two most important, impactful ones at 100% rather than 80% of 10 of them. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And sometimes you just let these fires burn out because actually that's not a priority for the business. It is sometimes just let it burn. Um, is that a good analogy, or would you expand upon that?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. There are a lot of things. I tend to always get anybody within my team or even other stakeholders to think about why. Why do you want it? Ask the question and keep asking the question until you really get down to the root cause. Most of the time, it can be just, oh yeah, because I want it. And that's it. Or it could be something else that what you were going to do before isn't going to really solve the problem. And people tend to have this behavior of just going naturally into solutioning, which is why we're here. So it's also important to detract a bit from the situation, the solutioning approach, and go into what are we trying to solve? What's the outcome that we want to achieve? And then we're here to give the solution. We're not here to think about the solution. We're here to understand the problem. And then we'll come back with something that will actually direct us in the right way. All this takes time. It takes understanding the person, the people around you, and the rooms, which is why leadership is so important because junior people don't usually look at that in this way. But if you have very good kind of emotional intelligence and kind of EQ, you can easily kind of navigate difficult stakeholders and rooms, and that is a good solid foundation.
Yeah. And start with the why is how most of these things start. So I've talked about this in many episodes so far. It's one of those GTM books that I always go back to is to start with Why by Simon Sinek. And the reason why I mention it is it's just so important in everything that we do across GTM, whether it's marketing, sales, RevOps. Why? Why is that important? And there's different connotations of what the start with the why actually means. But if you, it's a one word sentence, just like no is a one word sentence. It's a one word question, should I say? It's why. So it's a really important question to be asking when somebody's coming to you with, "I need this." Why? What's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? What's going to be the outcome? What's going to be the benefit? So thanks for sharing that. I think you've talked recently about responsible AI first operating infrastructure. That's a specific and deliberate framing from how I read that. But what does responsible mean in a GTM context, and who's getting it wrong right now? Maybe pointing fingers is not the right way to do it, but what where are people going wrong?
I think the people who are going about it wrong is treating it as treating it as an output. You need to treat it as a means to an end. The end is not the AI. The means is the AI. And the reason I say this is AI will not magically solve your problems. It will not magically make bad data good data. And understanding that from the outset will allow you to avert a lot of issues that you're going to see along the pipeline. And the reason I say responsible specifically is you need to understand, first of all, what makes sense to add AI into. Some things don't. What's the output that you want to achieve? And do you feel comfortable managing that? Because AI makes mistakes. To every single footnote that you can see in every tool, AI makes mistakes. Please check your work. That's very true. And if you do not have a very kind of guarded guardrails and thresholds and safe environment for AI to operate in, you're most likely not going to get the outputs you wanted. And so there goes costs, there goes time, there goes an experiment that feels easy, but it can get very complicated and very expensive and very hard as well. So the responsible approach is more think about the design, go back to the basics, think about what you want to achieve, and don't just throw AI into it. Put an actual plan in place, an actual output that you're expecting, because garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I think the line that you said there, AI will not make bad data good data, and that's you do see a lot of people like I've used AI to create an infographic or I've created a dashboard using AI, but that's a surface layer upon the data that's already existing. And what from time to time AI has a problem in doing is it doesn't always copy over what the actual data is and can calculate slightly off, can create, and we use the terminology of hallucinations. It's really important that you get that responsible AI first operating infrastructure embedded within an organization. Is that something that you do on a consistent basis today in your in the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm always trying to think about two different branches. The first one being, do we need AI as a wrapper in this to solve a problem? Or should we use it to build something instead? So the solution would not be AI driven, it would be AI built. So you wouldn't be interacting with AI. You'd just be interacting with a tool that was built by AI. The other one is you'd actually be interacting with AI to solve a problem or get somewhere you couldn't before. So what I call the AI wrappers, right? Um, they have different applications, but they all have very different pros and cons. I tend to always look at what are we trying to achieve? Is it a cost saving exercise? Is it an output exercise? Is it we need a regulatory exercise? Sometimes we just cannot get tools, for example, that you would otherwise be able to do in some other industry. You can't do that. So there's always a master question that you want to answer, and then you have different branches that you would like to you need to consider in order to answer that question. I think I always work in this kind of approach because it solves the responsible. You can understand what you need from an infosec, what are the use cases, what are the outcomes that you want to achieve. So it becomes a bit more clear as to the direction of travel. But I nowadays I never really enjoyed the idea of relying on suppliers. So I do a lot of the building myself. I don't use a lot of the wrapper solution because again, it can hallucinate. It's very tricky to work with AI in a product, but I use a lot of AI to build custom tailored solutions that answer 95% of the problems that off the shelf solutions couldn't before.
That's awesome. It's invaluable work. So I'd encourage my network and people who are watching this episode to get in touch with you to learn how to do that. Um, a mentor of mine once said, "The best time to build something was yesterday. The next best time to build something is today." Invariably, when we look at RevOps, it's always, "Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll do it tomorrow." So, what are the symptoms that tell you the moment maybe has already passed, and what does that delay in implementing a good structure around RevOps, what does that actually cost the business in your experience?
I think that, again, I'm just going to ask the same question. Why? Why leave it for tomorrow if you can do it today? The access to technology and the technology that we have at our disposal today can allow us to be faster than ever if you know the direction of travel, because moving, as something I always say, further rather than faster, because moving faster in the wrong direction is worse. So as long as you have the direction, you can get stuff done quicker than ever, right? Quicker doesn't always mean better, but some things, especially the smaller firefighting, you can just do it quickly. And that's the take. And I think that's more or less the idea. Why leave it for tomorrow? How complex is it? And I have a matrix that I usually use, which is effort versus impact. Easy way to visualize. What's the impact? If it's high impact, high effort. If it's high impact, low effort. If it's low impact, high effort. If it's high effort, low impact. That's how I usually use that with any team to structure what we should do now and not wait for later, or do it later, but put a plan in place so that we can start discussing what's quicker, what's more impactful, and if you want to leave it for later, why should we not do it now? Helps a lot.
No, it's a really good point. And if we look at the where revenue operations sits, so I'm a big proponent that it should sit within the revenue organization. It should sit within whether you've got a CRO, a CSO, a VP of sales, SVP of sales, whatever the terminology and the structure is within that organization, then RevOps should sit there. I've countered the arguments in previous companies where, well, this is finance and the reporting is done out of finance. But financial governance actually sits at the center of RevOps and the philosophy alongside process and technology. So, why and what changes in an organization when you bring that financial rigor into the operating model rather than treating it as a finance team concern? Why is that important to sit within RevOps?
I think the main take here is revenue operations. The way it really works is we become mediators. We become the intersection between the different teams. We have, theoretically, we have context that finance doesn't. We have context that sales or revenue doesn't. So we understand legally what things, if the leader has already led legal ops, I have, legally what we can do, financially what we can do, what is the gross margin, like if you keep doing things for free, like this is how you erode the value of the deal, so on and so forth. These are concepts that might be very alien to a lot of the reps or revenue side, but it's not for us. And so we can be in this kind of middle ground, mediating across the board, because also too much rigor and too much governance can slow down the process. If you're talking about a scale up Series A to Series D, that is a deal breaker for a lot of people, and you can be perceived negatively instead of positively. And I have a take that we are enablers. We need to enable people, not block people. That's the whole point. But you can easily go from being seen and perceived as an enabler to a blocker very quickly. And I mean, like with one action, it could really tarnish the entire thing. And good luck trying to recover that image. And so that's why consistency and just making sure that people are heard and there's a feedback loop is so critical for this to work. But to your point around the org structure, this is also something I've heard multiple times across the board on who it should sit into. But I feel like we need to challenge that a bit more. I think the exact reason why I said what I just said, revenue operations need its own C-level seat. It's not COO. It's not a COO, because COO probably oversees IT and HR and office management and things that I don't. right? I have no experience managing an office. Um, I have some experience managing people ops, but again, very different motion to revenue operations. So not exactly. So it's not finance either for the exact same reason. It's I don't do FP&A. I'm not certified in finance, so I can't actually lead a CFO kind of branch. So it's this in between where I think we still need a seat at the table to be considered and be heard, um, earned, not just given, because that's also critical, but its own thing.
That's really interesting concept, and I'll be brutally honest, I've never thought of it that way. Now, before we continue, a word from today's sponsor, Flourish. Most businesses don't underperform because they can't hire or don't invest in training. They underperform because the two things never talk to each other. Hiring happens over here, development happens over there, and somewhere in the middle, invariably performance breaks down. Flourish fixes that. They're an award-winning go-to-market talent partner working across early career SDR hiring, senior sales talent, and practical training that drives real, measurable results and not just activity. I've personally worked with their managing director, Sarah Skelton, for almost 20 years, so I know how they operate. They stay invested through the full journey and not just the placement. If you're looking to build a commercial team that actually performs, Flourish is where I would start. Find them at helloflourish.com. In sales, in life. It makes a ton of sense when you think about where you touch the business and the different areas that revenue operations is touching. So whether that is even with the people team, when people are joining the organization, and we'll get to how you would build a revenue operation in a second, but from the people team perspective, there's the enablement of people coming into the organization, and how do we enable people? Revenue operations has got a fundamental part of that. We've touched on the implications within finance and reporting and making sure that we've got the right data points. You've got the strategy and working with the CEO of the organization from a strategic perspective, or with the CRO from a strategic perspective. There are so many touch points across the broader business that I'm probably even blanking now on other areas that RevOps is actually touching upon, and having a seat at the table from a C-level perspective, actually, the more you think about it, makes a ton of sense, right?
Exactly. And the way I've done this before is revenue. I consider legal, finance, and the whole revenue side, marketing, sales, CS, and everything under the kind of revenue branch. So I've led financial, FinOps, legal ops, RevOps, of course. We know all its branches: sales ops, markups, and CS. But equally, if you want to really think about how to bring everything together, business BI and analytics, that's also part of it. Enablement, which is usually a branch within the revenue side only, but enablement can be so much broader, right? You can apply that to HR as well, people onboarding and offboarding, different kind of motions that you want to do from a culture's perspective, and all that. Equally, product operations, right? That is usually something that is not considered as part of revenue, but the whole reason we're selling something is because there's a product to be sold. And if we marry them together, which usually is the opposite in many organizations, product just sits on their own, revenue sits on their own, there's no real connecting tissue. The moment you do that, you unlock so many other things, from seamless customer onboarding and journey to self-service checkout to understanding roadmap and conveying that to customers, but using customers as well to drive the roadmap. It opens an entirely new world. So yeah, it is broader, which is also
Why
why
do you think?
its own thing.
Yeah, why do you think businesses have not made that leap? Is it because a business structure is pretty set in their ways? We've got a COO, we've got a CFO, we've got a CRO, we've got a CEO, we've got all of these C levels. Why do you think a business? Because I've never heard this before, and there may be examples out there, but why do you think this has not happened?
I think it's what you said. Businesses are stuck in their traditional ways. I think for a lot of people, they say that, I've heard this countless times in my career from many different angles, the titles don't matter, but they actually do. If you're not a C-level, if you're not a founder, they do, because for the rest of the mortals, it's one of the ways in which we use to indicate seniority, is how we indicate career progress. It's also how we frame what we do within an organization. And that is very clear. And revenue operations is the opposite example of that. Nobody knows what revenue operations actually is, or it's a very difficult concept to grasp for a lot of people in many organizations. And so providing that clarity and understanding is so critical. But I think companies are just stuck in their ways of looking at its CEO, COO, CFO, Chief Customer Officer. Sometimes it's the CRO who does everything. Sometimes there's a CRO, and then there's also a CCO, and there's a CMO. So then technically the CRO is just a Chief Sales Officer. So like that's just the confusing part. But I think you can expand. Why can't you just expand the base in titles in different ways, like growth hacker, something that super old, but what does that mean? Why can you do that for the base, but you can't do that for the top?
How would you go about building then a new revenue operation from scratch in 2026? Knowing what you know now, what would you build first and what would you deliberately not build immediately until you absolutely had to? So you're given carte blanche, and let's imagine you're going into a 30 million ARR SaaS business. How would you go about building a revenue operation within that business?
I would still try to approach it in a similar way, but looking for people with different skill sets. So I still think data and analytics is super critical. I feel like keeping a human in the loop is so important, because people might say, yeah, but you can chug AI and it will just do the analysis for you. No, it won't. Not properly or responsibly. So keeping a human in the loop is so critical. Data and analytics, then you have enablement, people to teach people what others are doing and what's the process, and even coaching reps, and that's still going to be necessary. Then general ops, and then people who deal with systems. And the way I'm treating this is no longer what's your Salesforce certification or any of that, because you can learn things faster than ever. You can learn Apex code. Sorry, you don't even need to know Apex code. You can just do and put that on Claude and it will spit it out. I always look for people with attitude. And the one thing that I would look for is first is getting a pseudo generalist, but a specialist who understands how to become a generalist, to evaluate what's the current situation. What are the low hanging fruits? What are the gaps? What needs to be fixing? Because people tend to think, oh, yeah, we can start with enablement. We have the processes. Let's just teach people. But if the processes are broken, teaching people broken processes is kind of useless. So figure out the foundations first. Then from there, a systems or a technical person to help stitch everything together. Once that is done, you move on to enablement, which is teaching what was done and kind of what's the real final process. And then you can move on to data analysis, because a lot of the organizations are always thinking, we need insights, we need data, yeah, I get it. We need a lot of things. But if you don't fix the foundations, the data is going to be wrong. And if I come to you in a board meeting with wrong data, what's the point?
Yeah, it's
So
career limiting.
exactly. And it makes me look bad. So
Very good. And you've built these organizations before when you've gone into an organization and there's very little there, or there's a sales ops person there. And some of these organizations have been global in nature. Do you have any differences that you would put in place if you've got operations which span the US, APJ, EMEA? Is there any differences, or is it just the skill set's the skill set regardless of region?
it's the skill set. The good thing is, I think that if you have the attitude and if you have the skill set, you can find these people. They're self-taught. I've never had anybody teach me AI. I did all the agents, I did all the apps by myself. I built everything because I was curious and I went and I did it. And I think if that is the profile that you have, chances are you're going to figure it out. So I'm less concerned about the regions. But from a business perspective, if half of my business is in the US, I need it. I need someone to be there as well. So it's good. It's good to have that regionalized approach to the function. And there are smart people across the globe. Like you can find them. But yes, I do think that regionalization, especially if you're talking APAC,
Yeah.
it is kind of critical to have that.
No, that makes sense. One of the things you mentioned there about when hiring people is you talked about attitude, but then talked about maybe a capability rather than the attitude. What is that attitude that you demand when building out this function? So you said pseudo generalist, but I would go out and say that's a capability or a skill set rather than the attitude. What is the attitude?
Don't wait for things to happen. Go get it. Go learn. Go break it. I don't care if you break it, as long as you understood what you broke and then you fix it. I'm fine with it. Go learn. Be curious. Um, the one thing that I'm always telling anybody in my team is, I'll give you the sense of direction, but I cannot sit down and teach you everything. Right? I need people who can just hit the ground running, ask the right questions, figure out the gaps, and you don't have to know how to solve. That's why I'm here. You don't have to know how to solve everything, but also don't come to me with I have a problem. Cool. Have you thought about a solution? Have you thought at least in a potential way that we can get to a solution? Because I might know it, but if I need to do mine and yours, it detracts a bit from the experience. So you have to have that kind of solution driven attitude and curiosity, I think.
Yeah, excellent. All great traits to have within a go-to-market organization. It was mentioned in a previous episode that we did. It's the mentality of getting shit done, and
Exactly.
being able to move quickly, and realizing that sometimes when um, you've got many balls that you're juggling, you can drop one. But the good thing about a ball is it bounces, and if it bounces, you can also pick it up. So it's not a disaster if you're juggling all of these balls and you drop one. It is right. You've recognized, now go and correct it and fix it. So it's a really good attitude to have. So thanks for that. Um, One of the traditions that we have on this podcast is we do a rapid fire 5 questions. Um, it's the same questions for all of our guests. It's just to really get a sense of what's important to you. Um, so why don't we go through those rapid fire? We'll pause around one of them because I think you've got an interesting anecdote that we can talk about as well. So the first question from rapid fire would be, what's that one tool in your GTM stack that you cannot live without?
Oh, a year ago, that would be a very different answer, but a Claude.
So Claude
I cannot
today is
live.
that one tool.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
And
a
sure,
phenomenal tool.
Salesforce and several others, but Claude can allow me to do things I couldn't before, stitching systems together and getting to the vision that I have of zero admin with a headless approach with no logins where everybody can just talk to the data. That's more or less my direction of travel. Claude is the main architect of that.
Very good. What's the biggest GTM myth that you would like to kill off?
Biggest GTM myth. There's no perfect timing. There's no perfect forecast. There's no perfect operations. Iterations is what I think is the best way to get things done. You're never going to have a perfect motion.
Very good.
Understand it, move on.
Yeah, I've said this to my teams many, many times. Perfection does not exist. So striving for perfection is it's a fool's errand. So iterate, iterate, iterate. So I could not agree more. So really good. The the metric you look at first thing on a Monday morning,
And or
NRR. And why? Why NRR specifically?
NRR to me tells the story of a business better than the amount of leads that are coming through sales cycles or anything like that. If we're keeping customers, that is the key for every business's success. It is not only cheaper, but it's also a real indicator of success. Acquiring customers is easy. Maintaining them is what really is really the really hard part.
As somebody that works in sales, um, acquiring new customers is not easy.
I think I
The
misspoke there. To my point is
I
the
get it.
acquisition is one motion. KP customers is also very hard.
Yeah, it's multiple motions. You've got the retention, you've got the onboarding, you've got the upsell, cross-sell. There's so many parts of that motion, but it is a fundamental metric. And probably in the last 4 or 5 years, it's become the number one metric within GTM over and above what your new logos was, because 10 years ago, it was all about how many new logos are we generating and how many of them are in our key ICP. Now it's very much from an NRR perspective, what is our retention plus upsell, and what's that mean for us as a business? And it always needs to be north of 100%. If it's north of 100%, you've got an okay business. If it's north of 110%, you've got a really good business. Anything above 120, you've got an exceptional business from an NRR perspective. Obviously, you need to make sure you've got new business coming through all of the time, but
Of course.
a healthy 100, 110, 120%, you've got a really healthy business. If we look at the next question of a GTM book, self-help book that you always go back to, what is it and why?
Well, that is a tricky one. I've read a few. I felt that most of the ones that I read were not very operator led and output led, which led me to write my own. But the one that I would recommend anybody getting into is the GTM architecture by Jaco from Winning by Design. It's a good textbook to understand metrics, KPIs, and kind of how a business from a very high level works. That is the one I would recommend.
Excellent. You skirted over a little bit of a topic there, which was you're also an author. So why don't you share with the audience the book that you've written and why you decided to set off on that journey to write a book? Because that's quite an investment of time as well.
Yeah, so my book is called Design to Scale. My initial motivation for it was exactly what I said. I read things and I realized that none of them were truly showing people how to execute specific examples or look at situations in specific ways, obviously based on my experience and the things that I've seen and done. But it's a very practical book. It's a book where if you're starting your career or not, you can read, and immediately apply a few of the concepts on Monday morning. And that is what I missed. So I sat down and kind of combined all the articles and everything that I've ever wrote, built a narrative around it, and said, how can I make this as tangible as possible? And so I spent a while writing it and finally managed to get it out there.
And where can people find that?
They can find it on my website. It's only an ebook for now. I have plans on making a physical copy, as I am a very physical kind of copy book person. But you can find it on RevOpsOnDemand.com. I'll share that with everybody, but it's on my website directly there.
Fantastic. And final question, who is the most underrated person in your professional network that more people really should know about?
It's a guy called Siddharth Sharma. He's someone I worked with a few times, has gotten me out of a lot of bad system designs in the world pre-AI, which is where you really see the true architectures shining through. And I'd commend him every day if I could.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience today the insights from a RevOps perspective. This is a conversation that could have gone on for hours because there's so much more to discuss around RevOps, and in future episodes we will speak to other RevOps leaders who are fundamental to a successful business. They are one of the most important unsung heroes within any organization. I'm now going to be a supporter of RevOps having a seat at the table when it comes to C-level. I think that's more we'll have a conversation about to see how that can manifest itself, because I think that's a really important tidbit to come out of today's episode. You talked in the episode around go learn as one of the attributes. Go and learn your craft, go and develop, go and invest your time in perfecting your skills when it comes to RevOps. And I've learned a lot from you over the years, and I've learned a lot in this conversation today from you. So my sincere thanks to you for carving out the time of your busy schedule in between writing books and consulting and everything else that you're doing. So thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, Mike. Thank you for the invite.
Your buyers are still sitting in that outside seat. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple or Spotify, drop a like and a follow. It genuinely means the world as we keep growing this channel. And if today's conversation sparked a question or a thought, leave it in the comments. Every month I answer your questions in a dedicated episode, and the best ones might just end up on Instagram, LinkedIn or TikTok. Your question could be the next conversation that we have. This episode was brought to you by Flourish. Find them at helloflourish.com. We'll see you next time with a brand new guest in the outside seat.